for lost time, 7 boats arrived today. What do you think? Are you surprised weather has been more useful than stopping these boats than any action by the government, whether you're talking about Rwanda or whether you're talking their proposed new Bill of Rights or whatever it is? You can let me know, gbviews at gbnews.uk. With me now is William Clouston, leader of the Social Democratic Party. William, I don't know whether there are people out there who are actually satisfied by the performance of the government on this, but you surely must be hearing from a lot of people who want action on the migrant situation.
Yeah, well, just general polling, Mark, tells you that the public are not daft, and they've noticed 75% of the British public say that the borders are not under control. And I don't know what the other 25% are thinking of. I mean, it's clear. I mean, this is totally out of control. We have an open border on the south coast. The whole system has been ceded to criminal gangs, and the government clearly lack the will, because that's what I'm blaming them for, the will to deal with it. You know, Mark, you just talked about the pandemic and the suppression measures. When they want to close down things and act, they can. It seems that on the Channel migrant crisis, they simply don't want to.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting comparison, because we have a government that purports to be able to micro-regulate every aspect of your life. So they can tell you you've got to stay in your bedsit 24 hours a day and only leave the bedsit for 20 minutes of exercise in a nearby park. That's something that apparently the government of the United Kingdom has the power to do. They can tell you that when your granny's dying, you're not allowed to see her. Granny has got to die alone. They have the power to do that, which is extremely cruel, extremely cruel. But apparently they can do nothing about this entirely different group of people who are just walking into the country. How does that? Why is the European Court of Human Rights not hearing cases about lockdown and grannies dying alone and all the other stuff?
Well, it could do. I mean, that's a slightly separate issue. I mean, I've always said that the general public will start to see some progress on this when the politicians that govern us are honest about it and say that for as long as we stay in these post-war protocols, we can't have a controlled border. That's just true. It was interesting. David Davis, came on today and said we should take a more robust approach and reduce the grant rate. I mean, possibly you could do that. A lot of countries have a stricter interpretation of the rules. Australia has a stricter interpretation of the rules. But let's be honest, you just won't have a secure border until we get out of these protocols. And, you know, that's just the truth, Mark. And I would ask any member of the public to challenge politicians and the government on it, because that's just the way it is, I'm afraid.
Well, let's just explore why they're not doing that. When Her Late Majesty died, we heard an awful lot about, the world has entirely changed since she ascended the throne in 1952. Hardly anything from 1952 still exists, except for the Queen, who was there for 7 decades. Well, one of the things that apparently has to go on forever are all these post-war global protocols. I mean, at the time things like the conventions, various Geneva Conventions and things were written, one continent, Europe, entirely owned another continent, Africa. That world has gone. Why should the international agreements designed for a world in which Europe owned Africa now apply when that world has been totally transformed?
Well, it shouldn't. I mean, it's not just that. I mean, you make a very important point. The single largest physical jurisdiction in sub-Saharan Africa in that period was Portugal, funnily enough. They had, 5 countries. And that, by land surface, that was the biggest. That collapsed in 1974 in the revolution. But we're in a totally different world. One of the things that's changed, Mark, is population. The UNESCO survey on population said that basically in 1950, if an African nation had, say, 5 million people, it's now got 50, and it's going to have 150 million. And that's the exponential growth we've had. And I've said many times, and I'll continue to say, that the number of people under the protocols that would qualify for asylum in Britain runs into billions. And if the gangs can get them here, unless the ridiculous people that govern us wake up and realize that this is not an NGO, it's a country. That's the basic problem, Mark. The people that govern us think this country is some sort of NGO. It's not.
No, it's not. And you're quite right to make that population point. If you go back a century, the British Isles and what was then British West Africa had identical populations. Now you look at the exploding birth rate in somewhere like Nigeria, and countries that can't support their existing population are expected somehow to support 6 times the population. No, they're not. We're going to need to build a lot more premier inns and luxurious country house hotels on the present birth rates in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you very much, William Clouston. You should look into his party, because, as I said, it's according to Ofcom, I'm not supposed to foment the violent overthrow of the government of the United Kingdom. So to save me having to do that, have a look at some of these alternative parties out there, because these guys have failed. Are blackouts the new normal? We're going to talk about that with Lois Perry. And later on, what's going on in China?